Hello everyone. I will be giving a presentation today on IMAPS and DNS. I will be discussing the technical details and best hardening recommendations for these two things. This is for Information Security and Assurance 4220 System Security 2 at Kennesaw State University, and this presentation is being given by me, Jared Simmons. So here are just a few terms I want everyone to know before I dive into this presentation. All of these are simply acronyms. So the first one is IMAP. It stands for Internet Message Access Protocol. The second one is Internet Message Access Protocol Secure. The third one is something we should be very familiar with now. It's the secure sockets layer. And lastly, DNS. It is domain name system, and I will explain what these things do later on in this presentation. So first, this presentation is to discuss Internet Message Access Protocol Secure, but first you need to understand what Internet Message Access Protocol is. So you know what it stands for, Internet Message Access Protocol. What this is used for is it's an email protocol that keeps mail messages on a mail server. It also allows the end user to access and manipulate these mail messages. So when you are using regular IMAP, you're on port 143, which is not secure. So when the user is using IMAP, it allows them to access and manipulate these stored messages. It allows for the user to organize them into folders, however the user wants to. The end user can also have multiple client applications configured to know which messages have been read. Also, they can flag messages and do things like store draft messages on the server. And depending on how the user wants to implement IMAP, it can allow for multiple logins, which allows the user to connect to multiple devices. So a tablet, a laptop, on an application on a laptop, your cell phone, things like that. Also, IMAP does contain authentication, which it's an authentication mechanism that's not secure because the client's credentials are transmitted in clear text. And that's where IMAPS comes in with secure. So IMAPS is Internet Message Access Protocol Secure. This is simply the secure method of managing the remote mail server. So how does this work? It's basically only, the first thing is you're switching from port 143, which is unsecure, to port 993, which is utilizing the secure sockets layer. And what that does for IMAPS is that the biggest vulnerability is that users' credentials during the authentication are transmitted in clear text. So when you switch to 993, it's no longer transmitting clear text. The credentials are now encrypted. Also, with this secure method, email messages are only downloaded from the mail server when the client opens them. So they're not just auto-downloaded, because there could be spam mail, phishing, things like that you wouldn't even necessarily want to click on and have downloaded. So with this, only messages that the client wants to open is downloaded. Also, moving on to DNS. So DNS stands for Domain Name System. And what you can do to make it easier to understand is that you can compare it to what we use as a phone book, but it's essentially a phone book for the internet. So DNS is very useful because it translates host names to an IP address. The host name is the common domain name that we know, such as apple.com or espn.com. But every single domain name has an IP address associated with it. The domain name system simply makes it easier for the user because users, we don't have to know these long digit domain or IP addresses, and in IP version 6 they're alphanumeric and they can be pretty long, so domain name system is really useful. So basically it translates domain names to the IP address so the web browser can interact properly. So this eliminates the needs, what I just said, it eliminates the needs for users to memorize IP addresses. And if there's a user that wants to load a web page, a translation must take place between what the user types in the web browser and the machine-friendly address necessary to locate what's typed. And with the domain name system, there are 4 types of DNS servers that are in action when you want to load a web page. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and usually it's pretty quick. So here's what's going on with these 4 types of DNS servers. The first one is the DNS recursor. The DNS recursor is a server that receives queries from client machines through applications like web browsers. Next, it goes to the root name server. So this is the first step in translating a host name to an IP address. It generally serves as a reference to other more specific locations. And then there's the TLD, or top-level domain name server. The top-level domain name server, essentially, it hosts the last portion of the host name. So if you're going to espn.com, the top-level domain name server hosts com, just C-O-M, the end of the domain name. So lastly, you get to the authoritative name server. Once the authoritative name server has access to the requested record, and that's the record being requested from the recursor, the DNS recursor. Once it has access to the requested record, it will return the IP address for the requested host name back to the DNS recursor. And now you have translated a host name to an IP address. So if you want to get into hardening IMAP and DNS, here's some things that you should do. These are some best hardening recommendations. So IMAP is pretty straightforward in terms of hardening. Essentially, the first thing you want to do is switch to Internet Message Access Protocol Secure, because that is in itself a way to harden IMAP. It's switching over to the secure version. And you do this by switching from port 143 to port 993. The reason it's more secure, as I explained earlier on in this presentation, was that port 993 utilizes secure sockets layer, which is encrypting all of the data being transmitted over the World Wide Web. So this is easily the simplest method of hardening Internet Message Access Protocol, because if you are using port 143 and it's being used unsecurely because of using port 143, you don't want your authentication mechanism to be transmitting your credentials, your login credentials, over clear text, because if an attacker sees that, your credentials, your username and password is right there, clear as day. Secondly, moving on to domain name system hardening, there are just a few of many things that you would want to do in order to harden this. First, audit the DNS zones. So what you're doing here is you're checking for any unused test domains or subdomains. They could be running outdated software, and they can also have unrestricted areas that are vulnerable to attack. Secondly, you want to keep your domain name servers up to date, domain name system servers up to date. If you run your own name servers, it's best to keep them up to date to prevent service exploits that target bugs and vulnerabilities. This is a very simple one. Just simply keep it up to date. Also, you want to use two-factor authentication. So say that an attacker actually gets your username and password. If you had two-factor authentication configured, it essentially, I mean, it would still be a problem that they had your username and password, but if you had two-factor authentication configured, you would still have control of your account. That person, or attacker rather, can't log into your account if they don't have access to the two-factor authentication as well. And this concludes my presentation. I appreciate everyone listening and viewing. Here's my works cited. These are all of my references for the research I've done. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.